In the middle of World War I, while empires fought across Europe and the Middle East, one of the oldest Christian communities in the region was nearly destroyed. The Armenian Genocide was the systematic destruction of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, carried out through deportation, mass killing, starvation, forced conversion, and the separation of families. It did not happen in a single day, or in one battlefield massacre. It unfolded through state orders, local officials, military units, paramilitary escorts, and policies designed to remove Armenians from their historic homeland in Anatolia. By the end, around 1 million Armenians had been murdered, and many others, especially women and children, had been forcibly absorbed into Muslim households. More than a population was targeted. An ancient culture, rooted in eastern Anatolia for over 2,000 years, was violently uprooted. To understand how this became possible, we need to look at the Armenian position in the Ottoman Empire before World War I. Armenians were a significant Christian minority in a Muslim-majority empire. They had religious and communal institutions, churches, schools, merchants, artisans, and intellectuals. But they were also politically subordinate, legally unequal in many ways, and vulnerable to local violence and state suspicion. In the late 19th century, demands for reform and protection were often interpreted by Ottoman authorities as threats to imperial unity. Large-scale massacres of Armenians in the 1890s showed how quickly fear, nationalism, and state violence could converge. Another massacre in Adana in 1909 reinforced the danger. These earlier killings did not make genocide inevitable, but they created a precedent. Armenians could be collectively punished, and the state could treat an entire people as a security problem. By the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was in deep crisis. It had lost territory over decades, and the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913 were especially traumatic. Muslim refugees fled into Anatolia after Ottoman defeats, carrying stories of dispossession and revenge. For the ruling Committee of Union and Progress, often called the CUP, Anatolia increasingly appeared as the last refuge of a future Turkish nation. This mattered because many Armenians lived in eastern Anatolia, the very region CUP leaders feared might become contested. Armenian political hopes for security, reform, or autonomy were reimagined by Ottoman nationalists as signs of treason. In this atmosphere, the empire's leaders became convinced that demographic control was essential to survival. The question was no longer how to govern diversity, but how to eliminate groups seen as obstacles to a nationalist project. World War I gave the CUP both a crisis and an opportunity. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire entered the war on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary, fighting against Russia, Britain, France, and their allies. Eastern Anatolia became a front against the Russian Empire, which also had Armenian subjects and soldiers. During Ottoman campaigns into Russian and Persian territory, Ottoman paramilitaries massacred local Armenians. At the same time, some Armenians did resist Ottoman forces or supported Russia, often out of fear for their own survival. CUP leaders treated these isolated cases as proof of a vast Armenian rebellion. This was a dangerous leap. The actions of some individuals were used to condemn an entire population. In wartime, accusations of disloyalty became a weapon, allowing deportation and murder to be framed as military necessity. A key turning point came on April 24, 1915. Ottoman authorities arrested and deported hundreds of Armenian intellectuals, writers, clergy, professionals, and community leaders in Constantinople, today's Istanbul. This date is now widely commemorated as the beginning of the genocide, not because violence had never occurred before, but because it marked the organized removal of the Armenian leadership. By targeting elites first, the state weakened the ability of Armenians to organize, communicate, appeal for help, or resist collectively. Communities were left disoriented and leaderless. What followed was not random mob violence. It was a coordinated campaign in which administrative orders, police actions, deportation lists, and confiscations moved together. The destruction of a people often begins by silencing those who could speak for them, document what is happening, and demand protection. The deportations that followed were presented by Ottoman authorities as relocation from war zones. In practice, they became death marches. Under the orders associated with Talaat Pasha and other cup leaders, an estimated 800,000 to 1.2 million Armenians were forced from their towns and villages in 1915 and 1916. Families were given little time to prepare. Homes, shops, churches, farms, and belongings were seized or abandoned. Men were often separated from women and children, and many were killed early in the process. The remaining deportees were driven southward toward the Syrian desert. The route itself was a weapon. People were marched for weeks or months without adequate food, water, shelter, or medical care. Deportation was not a humane transfer, it was a method of destruction disguised in bureaucratic language. Along the deportation routes, Armenians faced robbery, rape, abduction, and massacre. Paramilitary escorts, local officials, gendarmes, and irregular bands played central roles. Some deportees were attacked in remote valleys or near rivers. Others died slowly from thirst, hunger, exhaustion, and disease. The structure of the marches made survival nearly impossible, especially for children, the elderly, and the sick. Those who had money or valuables were often robbed before being killed or left to die. Women and girls were particularly vulnerable to sexual violence and kidnapping. The cruelty was not an accidental byproduct of chaos. The authorities knew what conditions awaited deportees and continued sending them. In genocide, murder is not always only the bullet or blade, it can also be exposure, starvation, forced movement, and abandonment. For those who survived the marches, the destination was often not safety but concentration camps in the Syrian desert, especially in areas such as Deir ez-Zor. These camps were overcrowded, underfed, and deliberately neglected. Survivors were dispersed, weakened, and stripped of community support. In 1916, another wave of massacres was ordered, reducing the number of surviving deportees even further. By the end of that year, only about 200,000 deported Armenians remained alive. The desert became a graveyard not only because people were sent there, but because they were sent there under conditions intended to kill. The process reveals the logic of the genocide: first uproot, then exhaust, then concentrate, then eliminate. Each stage made the next stage easier and reduced the possibility of rescue or return. Not all victims were killed immediately. Around 100,000 to 200,000 Armenian women and children were forcibly converted to Islam and absorbed into Muslim households. Some were adopted, some enslaved, some married under coercion, and many lost their names, languages, and family ties. This was also part of the genocide, because genocide can include the destruction of identity as well as the destruction of bodies. Children were separated from Armenian memory, while women were made to disappear into new households under extreme pressure. Some survivors later escaped or reclaimed Armenian identity, others could not. This forced assimilation shows how the campaign aimed not only to reduce Armenian numbers, but to erase Armenian continuity. A people can be attacked through killing, but also through the deliberate breaking of family, faith, language, and inheritance. The genocide did not end neatly with World War I. After the Ottoman defeat, the empire collapsed, but violence against Armenian survivors continued in the turbulent years that followed. During the Turkish War of Independence, Turkish nationalist forces carried out further massacres and ethnic cleansing against Armenians and other Christian communities. Armenians who attempted to return to their homes often found those homes occupied, their property confiscated, and their communities destroyed. The broader transformation of Anatolia included not only the Armenian genocide, but also violence against Assyrian, Syriac, and Greek Orthodox Christians. Together, these events helped create a more ethno-nationalist state from the ruins of a multi-ethnic empire. The Republic of Turkey emerged in a land where much of the Christian population had been killed, expelled, converted, or permanently displaced. The human loss was immense, but so was the cultural loss. Eastern Anatolia had been home to Armenian churches, monasteries, schools, manuscripts, cemeteries, and village networks for centuries. When Armenians were removed, an entire civilizational landscape was shattered. Sacred sites were abandoned, destroyed, repurposed, or left to decay. Families scattered across the Middle East, Europe, the Americas, and the Caucasus, forming a global Armenian diaspora shaped by trauma and survival. The genocide became a central wound in Armenian memory, passed through testimonies, photographs, orphan stories, family silences, and demands for recognition. Before the Holocaust, some observers described the Armenian Genocide as one of the greatest horrors imaginable. It later became a reference point in the development of the very concept of genocide, the planned destruction of a human group. Today, the Armenian Genocide remains both a historical fact and a political controversy. The academic consensus recognizes it as genocide, and as of 2026, 36 countries have formally recognized it. The Turkish government, however, maintains that the deportations were a legitimate wartime action and rejects the term genocide. This denial matters because recognition is not only about the past, it affects memory, justice, education, and the dignity of descendants. Studying the Armenian Genocide means looking carefully at how propaganda, war, nationalism, bureaucracy, and dehumanization can combine to destroy a people. It also means remembering that behind every statistic were families, homes, languages, churches, songs, and futures. The history is painful, but it is necessary, because denial protects violence, while memory resists erasure. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.